And good afternoon, producer Susan. You all ready to rock and roll today?
Yes, I am. What's
Let's
on the
see.
agenda?
All right. Man, we got a lot. I doubt we're going to get through all of it. We got a ton of stuff to get through. Um, let's see. Um, well, our quote of the week is a very interesting one it's from a book called The Market Process and how the pursuit of profit not only is not evil, it's how the pursuit of profit drives innovation and reduces consumer costs. We have an update on Donald Trump. Are you aware that his Truth Social company went public yesterday?
I did hear that this morning.
Well, we're going to tell you as of this afternoon how much richer that public offering has made Donald Trump. It's astounding. In the stupidest thing I've heard all week segment, we'll tell you about a woman who was arrested for changing the locks on her own house. And in a close runner-up, but a story that has such a sad and tragic ending, I didn't feel it was appropriate to put it in the stupidest thing I heard all week. But we'll tell you about a Colorado family who decided they were going to sell their home and flee to the mountains to, quote, live off the grid, and how that ended in tragedy. It was stupid and tragic. Um, in a little trivia, I was watching that segment, The Foods That Built America. We're going to
Mhm.
tell you about two famous names from the food industry and tell you which one was a real person and which one was a fictional character. We'll see how much you know about your food industry people. We'll tell you how a federal judge ruled when a lawyer for an illegal alien who was arrested by U.S. Marshals for being in possession of a handgun, which under U.S. federal law, illegal aliens can't have a gun. And we'll tell you how she ruled when his lawyer said it was unconstitutional to arrest him for that. We've got two clips by my favorite senator, John Kennedy from Louisiana, who we've played in the past, where he's embarrassed people like they didn't know how much CO2. Remember that one when
Mhm.
he
Yep.
was asking these
Yep.
experts and they were guessing 5% to 7%, and the actual
Yeah.
number was 0.4% or 0.04%. And then we have another one of him talking to an alleged expert on climate change. Both of these are hilarious. Actually, I don't know if they're sad or hilarious when these people, one's a judicial nominee and others a supposed climate change expert. Um, we'll tell you about another tragic story, a pre-dawn raid by the ATF last week that left the homeowner dead, and
Mhm.
ask why they had to raid this man's home with his wife and kids in it when they did, when there were so many other options. And if we have time, remember last week we started playing the clips about the teachers explaining why the half of the kids in their classes today are unteachable. Remember we
Mhm.
started doing that?
Yes. Yes.
If we have time, we'll play the rest of that, but we may not. And our taxpayer relief shot is really an astounding one. Comes to us from Houston, where a man gets into a gun battle with not one, not two, but three armed thugs. And it's really just astounding. One of the most astounding ones I've ever played. All right. So you any comments before we get into this?
Yeah, no, tragic day all around in that ship that hit the Baltimore Bridge,
Oh yeah.
the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore this morning.
Last time I looked, there were like six people dead. Is what
Yeah.
and
I
then
just can't imagine what it would be like to be one of the cars or vehicles on that bridge.
yeah, and getting plunged into the water, which I understand is 47 degrees.
Yeah.
And it was like, what, 4 o'clock in the morning, it was pitch black.
I think it was around, 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and so, pitch black, ice cold water, just tragic. All right. All right. Anyway, so let me start. This is a rather long quote, but people, a lot of liberals, profits evil, evil corporations, they make too much money. You got these billionaires, everybody likes to denigrate billionaires and corporations. Well, this is from an economics textbook, and I think it's the greatest explanation of why profit is good for humanity. And here's the quote: "It is the prospect of profit that induces entrepreneurs to undertake those risky, innovative enterprises that revolutionize methods of production, organization, and marketing in a capitalistic economy. This entrepreneurial pursuit of profit not only provides economists with a notion of competition to replace what is already perfect competition, but also explains why the spontaneous order never settles into equilibrium and why the market is in fact a process of continual creative destruction." Have you ever heard the term creative destruction?
Yeah. Mhm.
So and let me so when we talks about perfect competition, you have a great product. It's a good product. It's a
Mhm.
good car. You know, it gets 18 miles to the gallon, blah blah blah. And then somebody comes along with a better car. It gets 22 miles to the gallon. Then somebody comes along
Yep.
with a better car.
Mhm.
You probably don't remember this, but when I was little, it would take a week's pay to buy a 21-inch cathode ray color TV that got 13 channels. And you had to get up to twist the knob on the TV. It weighed probably 150 pounds. Have you ever seen one of those old TVs?
Yep. Yep.
And they
They
cost
were pieces of furniture. It wasn't a television. It was actual a piece of furniture.
some were
Mhm.
furniture, and then others I had, some tabletops, but even the tabletops. I remember when I first got married, I mean, it was a week's pay. We wanted to get a 25-inch TV. It was literally a week's pay and still only got 13 channels, and the resolution was crappy. I mean, crappy resolution. Today, you can buy a 65-inch color TV that gets 1,000 channels with incredible resolution for less than a day's pay.
Mhm.
So, and that's just an example of how, and it was only the pursuit of capital. I mean, if nobody was going to make money, because it took money, it took investment, it took research, it took development, it took hundreds of millions of dollars to develop what we now know as a flat screen TV today with, was it, I don't even know what the resolution is. It's 1080, whatever the heck.
1080. I think, well, now they've got the 4K and
The
yeah.
4K. And you're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars of
Mhm.
investment. And the old TVs worked. You could watch they were quote, a perfect, if you will, a perfect product, but they've been replaced. And you can look back every couple of years. Same thing with computers. We went from the old DOS systems, and then the better. So
Mhm.
again, when you look at the pursuit of profit, it drives innovation. Innovation improves quality, improves performance, and most importantly of all, lowers price because
Mhm.
you get a far superior product for a far lower price, and that is a benefit to consumer. So when you look at it, is the pursuit of profit good for the average American or bad for the average American?
It's good though, because it is good because you're always trying to be better. You always got to be better,
Right.
better
Right.
yourself.
Right. You're always trying, whether it could be, iWatches or look at phones today. You look at your
Mhm.
cell phone every day. The Samsung and Apple and Motorola are beating themselves up to come up with a better phone with more memory,
Mhm.
more storage for a cheaper price. Who
Yep.
wins? Who wins?
The
The
consumer.
consumer. The consumer wins. So the pursuit of profit is a win for the consumer. All right. Um, Anyway, I'm going to read that one more time. The pursuit of profit induces entrepreneurs to undertake those risky, innovative enterprises that revolutionize methods of production, organization, and marketing in a capitalist economy. This entrepreneurial pursuit of profit not only provides economists with a notion of competition to replace perfect competition, but also explains why the spontaneous order never settles into equilibrium and why the market is in fact a process of continual creative destruction. And
Mhm.
I think I've mentioned in a past podcast, if you look, somebody did a list of the 100 uh, greatest inventions of the 20th century, and this is again up till 1999. Of those 100, 99 came out of capitalist economies because there was no incentive in a communist or social incentive to risk everything you had to work, to max out your credit cards. Because if you came up with some invention like an Apple computer and you lived in a communist country, when you're all done perfecting it, the government would say, "Thank you very much, we own it now."
Mhm.
Do you remember what the only most important invention of the 20th century was that came out of a communist country? Remember what it was?
Uh, I think it was a gun.
It was the AK-47 assault rifle.
Yep.
All right. And that came out of Russia. By the way, it
Mhm.
didn't say it was the most important inventions. And the reason that made the list is it wasn't beneficial, but the AK-47 has played a role in many, many coups and overturning governments, revolutions. So the AK-47, the other 99 came out of capitalist countries. All right. You want to talk about how Donald Trump's fortunes have changed?
Yeah.
Well, a year ago, he got mad at Twitter and he started his own company called Truth Social, right?
Yes.
Well, Monday, that company, he did an initial public offering where he agreed to sell uh, 42% of the company to the public. Well, and that went public on Monday. Today at 1:30, those shares were selling for $71.30 a share, and Trump owns 79 million. So I'm not going to ask you to do the math in your head, but if you take 79 million shares at $71 a share, that comes out to $5.6 billion. That's how much Trump's net worth has increased between Sunday and this afternoon. Now,
And he can use that to pay off some of his legal fees.
well, not right away, because when you do an initial public offering, you have to agree to do what's called a lockup, where you can't liquidate or sell all your shares right away. So um, he has a 6-month lockup where he can't sell any of the shares he owns. And even after the 6 months, if he tried to liquidate the entire batch, in a week, he would crater the stock price. So, but the point is he can borrow money against those shares. And if the price holds at 71 or greater, or anything close to 70, beginning 6 months from now, Trump can start to cash those shares in and start to put, again, he can't do it in a week, he can't do it in a month, but Trump's net worth as a human being, now he was already worth about 2.6 billion, even with the judgments. So now he's worth, call it $8 billion with that
Mhm.
True Social, assuming the price holds up in the $70 range. All right. So, so anyway, so I think his money woes are over. Um, by the way, he would be our first well, actually, yeah, he's already been a president. He's a billionaire. He was our first billionaire president, and he might be our second billionaire president. Anyway, so in New York City, let me tell you how you get arrested for changing the locks on the house you own. This is the stupidest thing I've heard all week. So last week in New York City, a woman who was a homeowner, um, she had inherited a house from her mother who had passed away a couple of weeks earlier, and then she discovered that there were some squatters illegally, residing in her mother's home. So she went to the home, and when the squatters were out and they went to work, they were shopping, and she called a locksmith, and she changed the locks on the home that she owned. Well, the squatters came back and called the police. The police arrested her on a charge of illegal eviction because that she changed the locks on a home that she owned in an effort to keep the squatters who had illegally occupied that vacant home out. Is that the stupidest thing you've heard all week?
Absolutely. It's ridiculous that these criminals have more rights than law
I
abiding
think,
homeowners.
in fact, this is not only the stupidest thing I've heard all week. I think this is the stupidest thing I've heard all year so far. What are we, 3 months into the year?
Yeah, and there's countless stories of this happening across the country of homeowners getting arrested because the squatters have
Have more
violated,
rights,
have
right?
trespassed, and have more rights.
They have more rights. Yeah. No, the cop said no. If you want them out of your house, you have to go to court and get an order of eviction. Um, I think we
I
did
mean,
one.
I feel like those laws were meant for people who were your tenants, didn't pay your rent, were bad tenants, somehow violated your terms of your lease. That's what those eviction
Right.
things should be for, not for people who are blatantly trespassing.
Yeah. And this guy, I mean, yeah, they're illegal squatters. They never had a lease. They're trespassers. They had no right to be there. And I
And
would have
yet,
done
I
the
was my
same.
understanding that the one guy who was squatting ended up quote subletting out to another
Yeah.
person.
So yeah, a
Like, what the
squatter began
hell?
to began to sublet a room in the house and was collecting money from another renter. Oh, talk about stupidest thing I've heard all year. Well, that's it. And we'll post the link to that story on the website when producer Susan gets some time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Now you've heard about people, they call themselves preppers. They're
Oh
afraid.
yeah. Yep.
Well, this takes place in Colorado, and this is really it's stupid, but it's tragic. So a family, a husband and wife and their 13-year-old kid, they decided, they were preppers. They decided that they were going to go, quote, live off the grid. I don't know if you know where Gunnison, Colorado is.
Yep, I do.
Yeah, a big state park up there. They drove up to Gunnison and they took their gear, their tents, and they hiked up, I don't know, 10 miles into the mountains from Gunnison. And this was last summer. Well, a week ago, some hikers stumbled across their campsite and they found them all dead.
Uh,
And the coroner determined that they had all died of either malnutrition and or hypothermia. And they decided they were going to, their plan, which, based on what they told people, they intended to, quote, live off the land, surviving only on what they could grow, hunt, or fish. And they were woefully unprepared. They had no training. They didn't have the right equipment. They didn't have the gun. They didn't have the right clothing. And they didn't last 8 months. And it's what's really tragic is the 13-year-old boy who didn't want to go. So that is, I mean, to me, that's a tragic story. Any thoughts on that story?
yeah, I mean, the fact that they were unprepared, I mean, the fact that none of them, like the 13-year-old boy wasn't even a Boy Scout, or maybe he was, but at 13, he wouldn't even have made it to an Eagle Scout.
No.
You at least need to have some survival skills to learn how to
No, they had none of them.
hunt and
And
fish.
you
And
read, yeah, they didn't have the right knives. They didn't have the saws. They didn't have the hatchets. I mean,
there are people who can do it successfully,
yes,
but
I
they're
mean,
highly skilled outdoorsmen.
right. And they've got training, and if you were in the army or something, where they teach, but no, they were they had no training. They didn't have the right equipment, didn't have the right clothing. It was just so tragic. All right, let's move on to something a little lighter. Are you familiar with the names Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines?
Yes.
And how do you know those names?
Betty Crocker is famous for her cookbooks, and Duncan Hines is famous for its cake mixes.
Well, and actually, Betty Crocker, in addition to cookbooks, Betty Crocker is also the General Mills. That's a brand of cake mixes. Actually, that's how they got started with cake mixes. And for a long time before TV, Betty Crocker, there was a weekly radio show where Betty Crocker would read listeners' letters and questions about cooking and recipe. So between Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines, one of those is a real people and the other person is a fictional character. Which one do you think is real?
Duncan Hines is real. I actually do know this.
Yes, he was a food critic. He used to write reviews of. He was started off as a traveling salesman, and he would write reviews of all the restaurants he ate in. Betty
Mhm.
Crocker was a fictional character created by General Mills. Now
Yep.
they did and it was Betty Crocker was actually a room full of women. They would get all these listeners, all these letters from
Mhm.
asking questions, from women about cooking and how do I make this cake, and then the radio show, and they took one of the women and they said, Betty Crocker hour, and they would answer, questions, they would read letters and give answers. But Betty Crocker was a fictional character. There was no real Betty Crocker, but Duncan Hines was real. And by the way, you know what put Duncan Hines on the map in terms of the cake business?
Uh, they're they're brownies.
Well, let me tell you what they did. Betty Crocker was the first to come out with a all-in-one cake mix in a box. And their cake mix, all you had to do was add water. But they made their cake mix with powdered, they were instead of powder, they had powdered eggs as part of the all-in-one mix. Duncan Hines came along and said, well, first of all, when he was approached by Pillsbury, with Duncan Hines is a Pillsbury brand, he tasted their cake mix and said, nope, I'm not going to put my name on that. It's not good enough. And then they came along and they said, well, they worked and worked, and the food scientists came and they came back. And what they did is they said, instead of making it with powdered eggs, we're going to have an all-in-one cake mix, except the homeowner has to add 2 fresh eggs. And the adding of 2 fresh eggs, number one, made an enormous difference in the quality of the cake. And when he tasted that mix made with 2 fresh eggs instead of powdered eggs, he said, I'm willing to put my name on that. And here's the interesting thing. When it hit the market, the women felt more ownership, that they had actually cooked something as opposed to just adding water and putting it in the oven. I mean, so don't you feel more like that you had more to do with the outcome of the cake if you had to actually break the eggs and mix them into the powder?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the stupidest things I've seen, and I know one of our regular listeners will appreciate this. Russian tea balls. Probably one of the most simple Christmas cookies with respect to ingredients. It's flour and sugar. It's literally flour, sugar, and butter.
Okay. All right.
I've actually seen cake mix in the store for Russian T-balls.
Okay. All right.
I'm baffled by that because it's probably one of the simplest ingredient cookies to make. And yet I've seen it's next time you're in your grocery store, you will find Russian T-ball cake mix. And again, I know one of our regular listeners will appreciate that because I just can't, I can't get over that mix for that.
All right. Well,
At
anyway,
least
so that's
Duncan Hines cake and brownie. It's a little bit more complex.
right. But Dunkin' Hounds, yeah, again, you have to add the eggs. It didn't come with
Yeah,
powdered eggs.
yeah.
So, right. Anyway, I'm gonna have to go really quick on some of these. A federal judge last week ruled that an illegal alien that the illegal alien's lawyer said it's unconstitutional to arrest him for owning a gun because the Second Amendment guarantees all people the right to keep and bear arms. And the judge says, yeah, you're right. The Second Amendment applies to you even if you're an illegal alien. Now, that doesn't cut him free from the state of Illinois, charging him with illegal possession of a gun and carrying a concealed weapon without a license. But federal judge said, yes, illegal aliens have a Second Amendment right, just like the way they have a First Amendment right. So, all right. So now on to my favorite senator. We're going to talk about John Kennedy, and here this is a judicial nominee by President Biden. It's Judge Maldonado, and he's questioning her about a brief. I'm only going to play the last 2 minutes because we don't have time for the whole thing. But here's him asking her some questions about a brief she submitted when she was a lawyer, not a judge. Here we go.
Yes, let me ask you, when you were a partner in your law firm, you volunteered to write a brief on behalf of the Brady Center. You wrote the brief, and this is what you said. You volunteered for this. You weren't being paid. Is that right?
This was a pro bono case that one of my partners brought in. Yes.
You said, quote, assault weapons may be banned because they are extraordinarily dangerous and are not appropriate for legitimate self-defense purposes, close quote. Tell me what you meant by us.
By the way, I want you to remember that when we get to our taxpayer relief shot, where she was claiming in this brief that semi-automatic weapons have no legitimate self-defense because the taxpayer relief shot is going to make a lie out of that. So here we go.
And because they're extraordinarily dangerous and are not appropriate for legitimate self-defense purposes, close quote. Tell me what you meant by assault weapons.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Just to clarify there, I was local counsel. Our Supreme.
But you wrote the brief. Tell me what you meant by assault weapons.
Senator Kennedy, actually, I did not write the brief. The brief was written by.
You signed the brief, though, didn't you?
Correct. I signed the brief.
When you sign a brief, you're testifying to the court that everything in it is true, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That and I.
So they're your words in terms of the court, right?
Well, you're correct, Senator Kennedy. I would never
Tell me
sign.
what you meant by assault weapons.
So I am not a gun expert, and at the time, that brief I think was about 10 years.
Given the court advice about, say, ban assault weapons. What is? You told the court you were an expert. Just tell me what you wanted to ban.
Senator, sitting here today, as I said, I did not write that brief. I was local counsel.
Sign the brief.
I understand. At the time
Tell
that
me what you wanted to ban. That's all I want to know.
I don't remember the exact definition of assault weapons in the ordinance that was at issue.
So you submitted a brief to an appellate brief. You signed it, and you don't know what. And you said abolish assault weapons, and you don't know what you wanted them to abolish.
Senator, at the time that I signed the brief, I read the brief because our Supreme Court required an Illinois bar member to sign the brief. I was not responsible for researching the content.
You were responsible for the brief.
Absolutely. And sitting here today, I do not remember the characteristics of that were cited in the ordinance for the assault weapons ban. It's not an area of practice that I have specialized in. I'm sure 10 years ago, I could have answered your question.
And
it's sitting here today.
You think you deserve to be promoted with this record? Senator,
I stand by my record.
Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator, I stand by my record. Senator,
So what do you think of the Honorable Nancy Maldonado? Did she embarrass herself?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's asking a pretty straightforward question and she can answer it. Whether she quote wrote the brief or signed the brief or whatever, she should know what's contained within the brief.
When you sign a brief and submit it to the court, you're basically saying, these are my words. Now, if
Yep.
somebody, I mean, if somebody wrote it, that's fine. If somebody wrote it for you, but then you have an obligation before you submit it to the court with your name on it to,
Yep.
to make sure that you understand and agree with everything in it. So, by the way, how much time we got?
We got about 10 minutes.
All right.
And I
I'll
got my
play-
stranger danger alarm.
Okay.
And all the passerbys because it's a nice day out.
All right. Here's Senator Kennedy again. Here's this young man. They're having a hearing on climate change, and this young man was invited to testify. The head of the climate change committee is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Connecticut, Democrat, and he got this guy from some Save the Winter or Save the Snow, and this guy's a Olympian skier, cross-country skier, and he's testifying as, quote, an expert on climate change and the impact on snow. Here we go.
What is carbon dioxide?
I went to high school, but that's carbon dioxide is a gas.
Okay,
I'm not a professional to talk about carbon dioxide so much, but
well, you want us to abolish it, right?
no, there's always going to be carbon dioxide.
Right. So what is it you want us to do? Let me back up, because I want to, I mean, you're here as an expert. Tell me more about what carbon dioxide is.
I'm here as an expert cross-country skier who sees the changes in my winters and the landscape that I live in Alaska. And so carbon dioxide is what I see it as is, it's a gas that exists in our atmosphere. And
What? Is it the major part of our atmosphere? Or?
it's a huge part of our atmosphere, yeah.
It's actually a very small part of our atmosphere.
Well, okay. But, yeah, I don't know. What are you asking specifically?
Well, you say we need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. I'd like to know first if you know what it is. You want us to abolish fossil fuels?
I never said that.
You never have said that?
No.
Okay. What do you think we ought to do with fossil fuels?
What will we do with fossil fuels?
Yeah. Should we make any changes?
I would like to see a decrease in the use of fossil fuels. I think there's a possibility to use more electric generation.
Okay, over what period of time? 10 years, 50 years, 100 years?
That's not, I would like to see it come as fast as possible while continuing.
How fast?
Sorry,
How fast?
I don't have a.
You
great
don't
answer
know?
for that, no.
Okay, you just think, well, how much will it cost for us to become carbon neutral in the United States by 2050?
I'm not a professional on that. I don't have an
You
answer.
don't have any idea?
No,
You just think we ought to spend the money?
I'm not an economist.
Yeah, but it's gonna cost money, you realize that?
Yeah, but we've also talked about the,
All right, we don't have time. The rest of this is hilarious. We
Mhm.
may play next week. But how embarrassing that this is your witness. You're the Democrats in the committee, and you bring this guy to testify as your
Mhm, yeah.
witness on climate change. Could you
I mean,
be?
you should definitely, even if it's not your area of expertise, you should definitely research your facts before speaking in such an audience, in front of such an audience.
Yeah, I mean, this guy goes on, and by the way, when he talks about, and then Senator Kennedy goes into some of the tweets, this guy is pro Black Lives Matter, anti-cop. He wants to defund the cops. I mean, this guy is so far out in the left wing. He would need a parachute. This guy, I mean, and it turns out this guy is a real radical, and he supports all these radical causes. But we don't have time for that. How much time we got?
Let's see, we've got about 5 minutes.
All right. Well, I want to play this whole clip. Remember that judicial nominee said assault weapons are not needed or appropriate as
Yep.
for self-defense. Well, this guy from Houston wound up confronting not one, not two, but three armed three people with guns trying to kill him. Here we go.
New information about how many rounds were fired. Is that right? 40 rounds, Anusha and Sophia. That's what police are telling us. More than 40 rounds were fired, and not one of them hit that homeowner. He was standing in a yard just behind me over my left shoulder at this house. 3 suspects came by, police say, and they started opening fire at him, and he returned fire. If you can pan over here to the left, you can see the suspect's vehicle down the street on Glen Burnie. It sort of crashed there on the left. It's a Nissan Altima. Let's show you some of the video. This happened early this morning. It's remarkable this homeowner wasn't hit because there was an excess of 40 rounds fired, and the homeowner actually was able to hit all 3 suspects in a moving vehicle, which is quite remarkable when you consider all of these facts. 2 of those suspects are dead, police tell us. 1 died at the scene. The other died at the hospital.
So ready? So the guy shoots back at 3 guys in a moving vehicle, kills 2 and wounds the 3rd. Pretty good shooting, huh?
Yep.
We're not, here we go, more.
The 3rd suspect is at Bentop. He is in surgery. We don't know his condition just yet. The homeowner who's been answering questions all morning is still with police and has gone downtown to answer more questions. Detectives telling us that this is most likely going to be a self-defense case, and the homeowner will likely not be charged. His brother tells us, family members tell us that the brother goes to the shooting range often and has an AR-15, and that is what they tell us is the weapon he used in this shooting. Reporting live, I'm Jake Reiner, KPRC Channel 2 News.
Wow.
So do you think if he had been limited to a 10-round pistol, a 10-round magazine in his rifle, this might have come out a little bit different?
I don't think so, because you can literally change a magazine in literally 1 second.
Yeah, well, but anyway, but an assault rifle a suitable self-defense weapon? I think this guy just proved that it is. Isn't
Yeah.
it? All right.
I mean, I'm not a gun expert myself, but I'm comfortable handling them, and I can change one in 2 seconds. So I
Yeah.
think an experienced handler could change one in half the time.
all right. How much time we got?
We have about 5 minutes still.
Okay. Then I'm going to tell you one
Maybe a
more.
little 4 minutes.
Okay, real quick. Last week, you know what the AT, alcohol, tobacco, and firearm, right? Okay,
Yep.
so last week in Little Rock, Arkansas, there was a guy, by the way, he was the executive director of Little Rock Airport. He was making like over $200,000 a year. Well, apparently he had been buying guns and going to gun shows and selling guns at a gun show, as a private citizen, not as a gun dealer, licensed gun dealer. But the ATF said, hey, this guy is acting like a gun dealer, because he's selling guns every week. He's making a business out of this. It's not just, selling 1 or 2 personally owned guns. So, and they've been surveilling the guy. They had him. They knew where he worked. They knew where he lived. They knew what time he left the house. They decided they were going to raid his house where he lived with his wife and kids at 6 o'clock in the morning, when it was pitch black. Anyway, so they burst into his house. This guy hears, people breaking into his house. He starts shooting at them. They shoot back, and he winds up dead. Now, was he wrong in selling guns at guns, buying guns and reselling guns?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Did they really need to raid his house in the pitch black at his home?
No, not at all.
Could they have waited till he was, walking? They knew they knew what time he left the house because they had him on. Could they have waited till he left the house in the morning in the daylight, and as he was getting into his car and said, walked up and said, sir, you're under arrest?
Absolutely.
Could they have waited till he was actually driving down the street and pulled up behind him and pulled up in front of him and blocked him in and just, stopped his car in the middle of the street and arrested him in the street?
Absolutely.
Could they have waited in the parking lot at the airport where he worked, in the employee parking lot, and arrested him when he got out of his car in the employee parking lot?
Absolutely.
Could they have waited till he was sitting at his desk in the airport? And could they have, which, by the way, you can't bring a gun into an airport, so he wouldn't have been. Could they have arrested him as a desk in the airport?
Absolutely.
And if you think if they had arrested him in any of those other places, he'd be dead, or would he be alive?
Certainly he'd be alive. And if they had arrested him in the office, they would have also had the added bonus of embarrassment too.
Right. So
But I'm sure at whatever time, 6 o'clock in the morning, breaking into his house, he probably was thinking, I need to defend my family from somebody intruding my house.
right, and shot back, and he wound up dead. So yeah, it just boggles my mind where the ATF thinks that breaking, smashing somebody's door in at 6 o'clock in the morning when it's pitch black was the best way to go about arresting this guy. Anyway,
And although certainly a criminal, it doesn't have the appearance that he's like a dangerous criminal.
No, he's not a thought. He's not a wanted felon. He's not, there's not a warrant, he's not a dangerous, he hasn't murdered anybody. He was wanted for, at least according to the federal government, illegally reselling guns. Okay. You were illegally reselling guns. All right. We're going to arrest you and we're going to, anyway. I just think it was tragic. I think it was overreach on the part of the ATF. And, anyway, so that's just another tragedy took place last
Mhm.
week. Anyway, we're running out of time, so I want to thank everybody who listened to this podcast for giving up 30 minutes out of your day. If you want to find links to some of the stories we talked about, producer Susan will have them up on our website, which is JerzeeJoe.com, which is JER as in Robert, Z as in zebra, JerzeeJoe.com. If you want to have any comments, questions, or suggestions for show topics, you can email me to simply joe@JerzeeJoe.com. And other than that, unless you've got anything else to add, we'll sign off. Producer Susan, anything you want to add?
Nope.
All right, getting ready for the eclipse, right? In 2 weeks?
Yeah, we're going to be in 96% totality here where I am in central Pennsylvania.
All right.
I think you're going to be a little bit less.
A little bit less. All right. Anyway, thanks for your help today, and I'll talk to you next week. You take
All
care.
right.
Bye-bye.